It doesn't feel like a decision that could cost you 20 years when it happens. It feels quick, pressured, maybe even temporary. But in the United States, one bad choice involving a weapon during a robbery can instantly change everything, because the law doesn't just look at what you took, it looks at the danger you created, the fear you caused, and the risk you introduced into someone else's life. And that is exactly why armed robbery is treated as one of the most serious crimes in the system, with consequences that can follow you for decades. What seems like a moment can become a lifetime of impact, because once a weapon is involved, the situation is no longer about property, it becomes about safety, and the legal system responds with maximum seriousness from the very beginning. Armed robbery is generally defined as taking property from another person through force, intimidation, or threat while carrying or using a deadly weapon, and what many people don't realize is how broad that definition can be, because the weapon does not always have to be used physically, and in some cases it doesn't even have to be real. As long as the victim believes it is real and feels threatened, the law treats that situation as armed robbery, which means even implying that you have a weapon or displaying something that appears to be one can be enough to turn a simple theft into a major felony. This focus on fear and perceived danger is one of the key reasons why the charge is so serious, because the law prioritizes the protection of people over the value of property, and once that line is crossed, the consequences become much more severe. The reality of how quickly things escalate becomes clear the moment law enforcement gets involved. Because armed robbery is treated as a high-risk crime, officers respond with urgency, and arrests are often immediate and forceful, especially if there is any indication that a weapon was involved. Police may rely on surveillance footage, witness statements, and digital evidence to identify suspects, and once they have enough information, they move quickly to make an arrest, because public safety is considered a top priority. What may have felt like a brief moment of action can suddenly turn into being placed in handcuffs, taken into custody, and processed into the criminal justice system. And from that point on, the situation becomes far more serious than most people ever anticipate. After the arrest, the booking process begins, where your personal information is recorded, fingerprints are taken, and formal charges are filed, and in cases involving a weapon, those charges are almost always felonies, often categorized as armed robbery or aggravated robbery, depending on the state and the circumstances. Shortly after, you are brought before a judge for arraignment, where the charges are formally presented, and this is often the moment where the seriousness of the situation becomes undeniable, because bail is typically set very high or denied altogether, especially if a firearm was involved or if there is concern about public safety. In many cases, the accused may remain in custody while the case moves forward, adding pressure and urgency to an already difficult situation. The legal process that follows can take time, but every step carries significant weight, including pre-trial hearings, negotiations, and potentially a trial. And throughout this process, prosecutors work to build a strong case using all available evidence, including surveillance footage, eyewitness testimony, forensic data, and any statements made by the accused, while the defense attempts to challenge the evidence or argue that the legal requirements for armed robbery have not been fully met. However, these cases are often difficult to defend, especially when there is clear evidence that a weapon was present or that the victim experienced fear, because the law is designed to treat these situations with the highest level of seriousness. One of the most important aspects of understanding the reality of armed robbery is sentencing, because this is where the full impact of that one bad choice becomes clear, as many states have mandatory minimum sentences for crimes involving weapons, particularly firearms, which means that if a person is convicted, the judge may have very little discretion to reduce the punishment, regardless of personal circumstances or whether it is a first offense. Depending on the details of the case, a conviction can lead to 10, 15, or even 20 years or more in prison, and in federal cases, additional charges related to the use or possession of a firearm during a violent crime can add extra years that must be served consecutively, not at the same time, which means the total sentence can increase significantly, turning a single incident into decades behind bars. Another reality that many people do not expect is that you do not have to be the person holding the weapon to face the same consequences, because under many U.S. laws, anyone involved in the robbery can be held equally responsible, meaning that acting as a lookout, driving a vehicle, or assisting in any way can still result in facing the full weight of an armed robbery charge, and this often surprises individuals who believe their role was minor. but find themselves dealing with the same severe penalties as the primary offender. The law focuses on participation and shared intent, which means that once you are connected to the act, the consequences apply fully. If a conviction occurs, the consequences extend far beyond prison time, because a felony conviction for armed robbery becomes a permanent part of your criminal record, affecting your ability to find employment, secure housing, and build a stable future. And in many cases, it also results in the loss of certain civil rights, including the right to legally possess firearms. For non-citizens, the impact can be even more severe, potentially leading to deportation or denial of immigration benefits, making the consequences not just legal but deeply personal and long-lasting. Even after serving a sentence, the stigma of a violent felony can follow a person for years, making it difficult to fully rebuild their life and move forward. The reality is that armed robbery is one of those charges where a single bad choice can truly change everything, because the law is designed to treat it as a serious threat to human safety, not just a property crime. And once a weapon is involved, the consequences escalate immediately, leaving very little room for second chances. What may feel like a quick decision in a moment of pressure or desperation can turn into years of prison time, a permanent record, and a future filled with challenges that are difficult to overcome. And that is why understanding the seriousness of this charge is so important, because once that line is crossed, the impact is not just immediate, it is long-lasting and life-changing in ways that are incredibly difficult to undo.